A human bought an infertile alien woman for $1. $8 years later, she gave him 7 children. Ethan Porter walked through the crowded marketplace, his steps slow and heavy with the weight of failure. Once, he had been a promising scientist, a man with big dreams and ideas. But those dreams had fallen apart. His business ventures had failed. His savings were gone. And now he was stuck on a far-flung, forgotten planet, working menial jobs just to get by. The market was nothing special, a hodgepodge of stalls and shops selling anything from alien tech to strange, exotic foods. But there was something about the place that had a pull. Ethan never meant to come here, but somehow he always found himself walking its dusty streets. It was here that he felt disconnected from his failures, lost among the bustling crowd of beings from all corners of the galaxy. He glanced at the items being sold, some familiar, some bizarre, and paused at a stall tucked into the corner. An older man with rough skin and a crooked smile leaned against the counter, watching the crowd with sharp, calculating eyes. At first, Ethan didn't notice what the trader was selling, but the deep, quiet voice of the man called his attention. "You looking for something special?" The trader's words were slow, as if they were weighed with secrets. Ethan took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "I don't know," Ethan muttered. "Maybe." The trader smiled, though it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. With a quick motion, he pulled back a draped cloth, revealing a strange, alien woman standing silently behind it. Ethan froze. She was tall, her skin a vibrant green that shimmered softly under the sun. Her features were sharp yet delicate, with a calm, almost otherworldly expression on her face. But what truly caught Ethan's attention was her eyes. They were an unusual shade of violet, like the last light of sunset. For a moment he felt a strange connection, as if she were looking into him rather than the other way around. "This one," the trader said, "is on sale today, only $1. Ethan blinked, confused. $1, he repeated, unsure if he had heard correctly. The trader nodded, his smile widening. "Yes, $1, she's infertile, you see. Doesn't have much value to anyone anymore. No one wants her." The word infertile hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like the market around them had faded into silence. Ethan looked at the woman again. She seemed calm, almost serene, despite the way she was being treated. I don't understand," Ethan said, unsure what to make of the situation. "Why is she being sold?" The trader's eyes flickered briefly to the woman before returning to Ethan. "Her species," the trader explained, "is known for having children very rarely, and she is unable to bear any. She's no use to most buyers." Ethan frowned, the words making little sense. He glanced at the woman once more. She hadn't moved. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her posture made Ethan think she had heard everything the trader said. She stood tall and proud, despite the words meant to diminish her. "Doesn't she deserve more than that?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than he intended. The trader waved his hand dismissively. "She's just one of many, not worth the trouble." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But if you want her, she's yours, only $1, a bargain, really." Ethan felt something stir inside him. He had no idea what had come over him, but something about the situation seemed wrong, too wrong to ignore. The woman deserved more than being sold like livestock. How? How can she be sold for so little? Ethan asked, his gaze still locked on her. She wasn't just some object, she was a person. The trader shrugged. "What's the point of paying for something that can't even give you children? It's not like anyone wants her." Ethan didn't respond. He looked at the woman again, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes, and something inside him shifted. He had nothing left but this woman. She didn't deserve to be treated like this. "I'll take her," Ethan said, his voice steady, but with an unfamiliar conviction. The trader raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but then he grinned. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said. "She's yours." The exchange was quick, and before Ethan knew it, he was standing beside the woman, his heart pounding in his chest. The trader handed him a small, official-looking document, and with one last smirk, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, hadn't moved since the transaction. She still had that distant, calm look in her eyes, but now something else had settled into her expression, something like curiosity. Ethan cleared his throat, not sure how to start the conversation. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "I'm Ethan." He extended his hand, unsure if it would mean anything to her. She looked at him for a long moment, her violet eyes studying him before she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, with a faint musical lilt to it. "I am Lyra," she said, her words carrying an air of quiet dignity. Ethan nodded, still unsure what to say. "Well, Lyra, I guess we're stuck with each other now." For the first time, Lyra's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to make Ethan feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as strange as it seemed. As the days passed, Ethan found himself growing used to Lyra's presence in his life. He had never imagined he would end up in a situation like this, but he couldn't deny that he was beginning to look forward to their daily routines. She was quiet, rarely speaking, but her actions spoke volumes. She was resourceful, learning quickly how to adapt to the human world. She'd quietly clean the house, her green skin blending with the surroundings as she moved with graceful precision. She'd spend hours poring over books he had long since given up on reading, her violet eyes flicking across the pages with the intensity of someone deeply focused. Ethan didn't know what he was expecting when he had bought her. He didn't expect to feel a bond forming between them, but it did. It was a slow thing, growing with each passing day. Lyra never asked for anything, never complained. She simply existed in his world with an odd sense of calmness that both fascinated and unnerved him. In turn, Ethan started to look at her not as an object, but as a person. He found himself worried about her in ways he never imagined. When she was quiet for too long, he would check on her, making sure she was okay. When she seemed lost in thought, he'd wonder what she was thinking. And as time went on, he began to feel a sense of protectiveness toward her, something he hadn't expected to feel for someone he had purchased. But there was one thing that still lingered in his mind, the thing that kept him awake at night, the claim that she couldn't bear children. Lyra had never mentioned it again, but the thought was always there. The trader's words haunted him, even though he had started to wonder if they had been a lie. But what did it matter, he thought. They were just two people trying to survive in a galaxy that didn't care for them. If anything, Lyra had become his only real companion, and in a way, that was enough. Little did he know, the universe had far different plans for them both. And soon, he would discover that the life he had built with Lyra would be tested in ways he never could have predicted. As weeks turned into months, Ethan found himself falling into a routine with Lyra. They had settled into a strange but comfortable rhythm in their small, modest home. There were still moments of awkward silence, especially in the early mornings when the world outside was still dark. But over time, Ethan realized he looked forward to seeing Lyra each day. She wasn't just a silent figure in his house anymore. She was starting to feel like home. Their relationship had evolved in a way Ethan hadn't expected. At first, he had assumed Lyra would be a companion of sorts, someone to keep him from feeling so alone. But as the days went by, he noticed something shifting between them. It wasn't just the simple companionship that mattered anymore. There was a deeper connection growing, something he couldn't put into words. It was in the way she would look up at him with those deep, violet eyes, or the way she moved about the house with a kind of grace that made everything feel more peaceful. One morning, Ethan woke to the smell of something sweet wafting through the air. It was a smell he didn't recognize, and it instantly caught his attention. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of sleep still on him, and then stumbled into the kitchen, drawn by the scent. Lyra was standing by the counter, carefully mixing ingredients into a bowl. Her green skin seemed to shimmer under the soft morning light, and her hands moved with practiced ease, as if she had done this many times before. The sight of her, so focused and calm, struck Ethan in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time in months, he felt a pang of warmth that had nothing to do with the food. "Morning," he said, his voice still groggy. Lyra turned slightly, and the faintest of smiles touched her lips. "Good morning," she replied in her soft, melodic voice. She held up a spoonful of the batter she was mixing. "Would you like some?" Ethan couldn't help but smile back. "Sure, what is it?" Lyra raised an eyebrow but didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to sit at the small kitchen table. Ethan took a seat, watching as she continued to work. There was something calming about her, something steady and constant that seemed to fill the room. Minutes later, she placed a small dish of what appeared to be pancakes in front of him. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, golden with a slight green tint that matched her skin. The smell was incredible, sweet with a hint of something savory. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure what to expect, but then he picked up a fork and took a bite. The moment the food hit his tongue, his eyes widened in surprise. It was delicious. The flavors were unlike anything he had tasted before, rich and complex, with a comforting warmth that made him feel both energized and at ease. Lyra watched him carefully, waiting for his response. Ethan looked up, his mouth still full of food. "This is amazing," he said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "You never told me you could cook." "I never had the chance," she said softly. "Where I come from, it's not something we do often." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "Where you come from?" Lyra's gaze shifted, and for the first time he saw a hint of sadness in her eyes. It was a brief flicker, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I never had the chance to live like this. I was always told what to do, what to be." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle in the room. He didn't push her, but something in him longed to know more. She had come from a place so different from Earth, and it made him realize how little he knew about her past. But for now, that was okay. They didn't have to talk about everything, not yet. Instead, they enjoyed the silence, the warmth of the meal, and the connection that was slowly growing between them. Days turned into weeks, and their lives began to feel more intertwined. Ethan began teaching Lyra about Earth, about the things he had learned in his travels, about music, art, and literature. In return, she shared glimpses of her culture, her people, and the history of her world. Some of it was fascinating, while other parts were heartbreaking. Lyra's people, the Nylar, had once lived in peace. Their society centered around the bond between parent and child. Children were rare, but when they were born, the bond was sacred, and the love they shared with their offspring was unmatched by anything Ethan could imagine. But over time, their world had become harsher. War, famine, and disease had taken their toll on her species. Children were born less frequently, and eventually the idea of having them became more of a distant dream than a reality. When Ethan learned about the tragedies that had shaped her people's past, he found himself even more drawn to Lyra. The pain she carried was not something he could fully understand, but he could see how deeply it affected her. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their small home, watching the sunset, Ethan finally asked her about the one thing that had been on his mind since the moment he had bought her, the thing that still haunted him. "You told me you couldn't have children," he said, his voice low. Lyra's gaze turned toward the horizon, her eyes distant. "It's true, I cannot," she said softly. "At least that's what they told me." Ethan's heart sank. He had always wondered if there was more to it. "But why, I don't understand. Your species can have children, right?" Lyra nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, but not often. The conditions in our world have changed. The bond between parent and child has become harder to form. Many of us, like me, are considered infertile." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. He had bought Lyra, thinking she couldn't have children, that her inability to reproduce had made her worthless in the eyes of others. But now he wasn't so sure. Something about the way she spoke made him question everything he thought he knew. "I don't think you're infertile," Ethan said quietly. "I think they were wrong about you." Lyra didn't answer right away. She simply stared out into the distance, her expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. He wanted to reach out to her to comfort her, but he didn't know how. "It's not something I can change," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just how it is." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He couldn't pretend to understand what she had gone through, but he did understand one thing. He didn't care about her inability to have children. He didn't care about what anyone had told her. He cared about her. And as the days went by, he began to realize that his feelings for her had changed. They weren't just those of a man who had bought her out of loneliness anymore. They were something deeper, something real, something he hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, a month later, Ethan sat with Lyra at the kitchen table. He had been trying to explain the concept of human family dynamics to her, but the conversation seemed to drift in an unexpected direction. "Humans form families for all kinds of reasons," he said. "But one thing I know for sure is that it's not just about having children. It's about connection, about love." Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening. "Do you think that is possible for us?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. He hadn't realized how important the question was until it had left her lips. "I think," he said carefully, "anything is possible." Lyra gave him a small smile, and it was the first time she had smiled at him in a way that made his heart feel like it was lifting off his chest. The unspoken words between them hung in the air, and for the first time, Ethan realized that this unlikely pairing, this strange relationship, wasn't just about survival anymore. It was something deeper, something neither of them had expected, but both were willing to explore. The days passed, and they continued to grow closer. But Ethan still couldn't shake the feeling that their life together was about to change in ways neither of them could predict. The days passed like the quiet flow of a river, slow, steady, and peaceful. Ethan and Lyra had settled into a life that, while far from perfect, was theirs. They found comfort in their daily routines, a rhythm that allowed them to exist together in ways they hadn't imagined possible. But even in their peaceful life, there were moments when the past crept in, and things began to shift. One afternoon, as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the small house, Ethan and Lyra sat together on the porch. It was their usual time to relax, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the evening sky. The world around them seemed to breathe in time with their quiet companionship. Lyra, however, wasn't as calm as she appeared. She had been unusually distant over the past few days, her thoughts clouded, and Ethan couldn't help but notice. She would sit next to him, but her mind seemed to wander far away. He had learned to read her subtle cues, and it worried him. "Is everything all right?" Ethan asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. He turned to look at her, trying to gauge what was troubling her. Lyra hesitated before meeting his gaze. She had always been quiet, but her silence had never felt so heavy before. "I don't know," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "There are things I can't stop thinking about, things I never thought would come back." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked out at the distant mountains, her eyes filled with something darker than usual. "I've been thinking about my people, about what I've lost, what we've lost." Ethan followed her gaze, unsure of how to respond. He had always known that Lyra carried the weight of her past with her, but he had never expected it to show up like this. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," he said gently, not wanting to push her if she wasn't ready. But Lyra shook her head. "I think it's time I did," she said, her voice steady but filled with a sadness that Ethan had never heard before. "When I was taken from my world, I thought it would be a new beginning, a chance to escape the pain, but it's still with me. And now I realize it's part of who I am." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't fully understand what she had been through, but he knew the pain of feeling lost, of having your world shattered and being forced to build something new from the ruins. "I know you've been through a lot," he said quietly, "but you don't have to carry that burden alone, not anymore." Lyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. "I'm not sure how to leave it behind," she said, her voice barely audible. "My people, my home, they're all gone. And I don't know what's left for me." Ethan reached over and gently took her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words could express. "What's left is us," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "And whatever happens, we'll face it together." For a long moment, Lyra didn't say anything. She simply looked down at their joined hands as if trying to understand the weight of his words. Ethan waited, patient, knowing that sometimes silence spoke louder than anything he could say. Finally, Lyra gave a small nod. "I want to believe that," she said softly, "but I can't help but wonder what's going to happen next. Will I ever really be free from my past? Can I ever move forward?" Ethan didn't have an easy answer. He could tell that she was struggling with something deep inside her, something she hadn't fully shared before. It wasn't just about her species' tragic past. It was about her own place in the universe. "I don't know what the future holds," Ethan admitted. "But what I do know is that you don't have to face it alone. I'm here. We're in this together no matter what." Lyra looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. She found none. After a moment, she gave him a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "I wish I could believe that fully," she said quietly, "but there's something I need to tell you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had the feeling that whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. He squeezed her hand gently, urging her to continue. Lyra took a deep breath. "I've been hiding something," she began. "Something I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid." Afraid of what it meant. Ethan's stomach tightened, but he nodded, urging her to speak. I'm not infertile," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to process her words. "What but?" the traitor said. "I know what he said," Lyra interrupted, her eyes flickering with something between frustration and sorrow. "I didn't know what to say at the time. I thought I was broken. I thought I was something that could never be loved, that no one would want me." Ethan sat back, stunned. His mind raced to make sense of everything. All this time he had believed what the traitor had said. He had assumed that Lyra's inability to have children was just a fact of life, something she could never change. But now, hearing her words, it felt like a veil had been lifted. Then, why? Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Lyra took another deep breath, her eyes casting downward. Because I didn't want to give you false hope. I didn't want you to think that you could save me, that we could have children when I was never meant to. I didn't think it was possible. Ethan's mind swirled with confusion and disbelief. But why now? Why tell me this now? Because it's happening, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I'm pregnant. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at her, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She was pregnant. And not just with one child, but with multiple, something he couldn't quite comprehend. I don't know what this means, Lyra continued, her voice trembling. I never thought it would happen, but it's happening, and I'm scared. Ethan reached out, his hands trembling as he cupped her face gently, forcing her to look at him. You're not alone in this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll figure this out together, no matter what. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, taking a shaky breath. When she opened them again, there was a sense of relief in her expression. For the first time in a long while, she seemed to believe him. I'm scared, she whispered again, her voice cracking with emotion. But maybe we can make it work. Maybe this is the beginning of something new. Ethan held her close, not knowing what the future would bring, but knowing that whatever happened, he would face it by her side. Together, they would find a way through the storm that was coming, and they would do it as a family, however it was meant to be. The night grew darker around them, but in the quiet of their small home, there was a new hope in the air, a hope that neither of them had expected but both desperately needed. The days after Lyra's revelation felt like a blur. Ethan had never imagined his life could change so drastically, yet here he was, facing a future he hadn't expected, filled with a new kind of uncertainty. Lyra was pregnant. She hadn't just been told she was infertile, she was carrying a child, several in fact. And though the news had left Ethan reeling, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't leave her side, no matter what came next. The first few weeks after Lyra shared the news were filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. They had to figure out what it meant for both of them. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. The future of their child, or children, would depend on their ability to navigate the challenges ahead. And as much as he wanted to dive into action, the truth was, he didn't know where to begin. Lyra's condition seemed to grow more complex as the days passed. She became quieter, more withdrawn, as though the weight of the pregnancy was pressing down on her. Ethan tried his best to comfort her, but he didn't fully understand what she was going through. He could only watch as she struggled, hoping that his presence would provide some sense of relief. One afternoon, while Lyra was resting on the couch, Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the horizon. His thoughts were a tangle of questions and uncertainties. He had always been someone who sought answers, who believed in solving problems, but this was different. He couldn't solve this by reading a manual or asking for advice. This was something they would have to figure out together, step by step. The door creaked open and Lyra's soft voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan, she said, her tone quiet but firm. We need to talk. Ethan turned, his heart skipping a beat at the seriousness in her voice. What's wrong? He asked, his worry rising. Lyra stood in the doorway, her posture straight, though there was a noticeable tension in her shoulders. I need to tell you something, she said. Something I've been thinking about. Ethan walked over to her, concern written across his face. Of course, what is it? Lyra hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. Then, with a deep breath, she looked up at him. I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of what this means. I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry this through. Ethan's heart clenched. He had known she was struggling, but hearing her admit it out loud made it all the more real. Lyra, we're in this together. You don't have to do this alone. She shook her head slowly. I know you're here for me, but what if this is too much? What if my body can't handle it? Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. We'll get through it, Lyra. I don't care what happens. You're not alone in this. Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with both uncertainty and hope. What if something goes wrong? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's grip tightened around her hand. We'll face it together. We'll figure it out as it comes. You don't have to be afraid. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lyra seemed to relax a little, as though the weight of her fear had lessened just slightly. Ethan could feel her tension, but he could also feel the trust in her touch. the connection they shared. "You don't know how much that means to me," Lyra said quietly, her voice softer now. Ethan smiled gently. "I'll always be here for you. We'll take it one step at a time." And so they did. Each day was a new challenge, but also a new opportunity to learn about one another and the life they were creating together. Lyra's pregnancy continued to progress, and though there were moments of discomfort, there were also moments of joy. They began to talk about the future more, what kind of life they wanted to build for their child. Ethan found himself imagining a future that he had never thought possible, a family, a home, and the chance to build something beautiful with Lyra. But not everything was easy. As the weeks went on, the pressure began to mount. The whispers from the outside world started to grow louder. It wasn't long before word spread about Lyra's pregnancy, about the fact that she was carrying multiple children, something unheard of for her species. There were rumors and questions, and soon enough the authorities took notice. One evening, as Ethan was working in the garden, a vehicle pulled up outside their home. He recognized the sleek military-style craft immediately. It belonged to the local government, the same one that had kept an eye on him ever since he arrived on this planet. Ethan's heart sank as the vehicle's hatch opened, and two uniformed officers stepped out. Their faces were stern, and their eyes were scanning the area as if searching for something. They approached Ethan, who stood frozen in place, wondering what they wanted. "Mr. Porter," one of the officers said, his voice cold and official, "we need to speak with you." "It's about your situation." Ethan frowned, his stomach knotting. "What do you mean?" The officer's expression didn't change. "You've been harboring an alien, one that is considered a liability. Her species' genetic code is unstable, and we have reason to believe she could pose a threat to our society. We need to take her into custody." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly who they were talking about. They wanted Lyra. They wanted to take her away to do who knows what with her and their children. "No," Ethan said firmly, stepping forward. "You can't take her. She's not a threat. She's pregnant with my children. You have no right to take her away from me." The officers exchanged glances, but neither of them stepped back. "This is not a matter of rights, Mr. Porter. This is a matter of security. The council has already made their decision. She is to be detained for further examination." Ethan felt his chest tighten. His mind raced, searching for a way out of this situation. He couldn't let them take Lyra. He couldn't let them take his family. "I won't let you take her," he said, his voice low and steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're going to fight us?" Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew he wasn't going to just hand Lyra over to them, not without a fight. At that moment, Lyra appeared at the door, her face pale with fear. She had overheard everything. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan stepped in front of her, his body a protective shield. "They're here to take you," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "But I won't let them. We're leaving right now." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, but also with something else, trust. "Where will we go?" she whispered. Ethan didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing: he couldn't let them tear their family apart, not without doing everything he could to protect them. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice strong. "We'll find a way." The officers didn't seem to be backing down. They took a step forward, their hands moving toward their weapons. Ethan's heart raced, but he stood his ground, knowing that if it came down to it, he would fight for Lyra, for their children, for everything they had built together. But then, just as the situation seemed to escalate, a voice from behind them stopped everything. "Leave them alone." Ethan turned quickly, his eyes scanning the area for the source of the voice. Standing in the shadows of the house was another figure, an older woman dressed in a long, flowing robe. Her face was weathered, but her eyes were sharp, filled with wisdom and strength. She stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "She's under my protection," the woman continued, her voice clear and firm, "and you will not take her from here." The officers seemed taken aback. One of them stepped forward, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "And who are you?" he demanded. The woman's gaze never wavered. "I am someone who values life, and I will not allow you to destroy what's been created here." Ethan watched, his breath caught in his throat, as the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. The officers stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they turned and retreated to their vehicle without another word. Ethan stood still for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Lyra stepped up beside him, her hand gently brushing against his arm. "Who was that?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, his eyes wide with awe. "I don't know," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "But I think we just got an ally." The days that followed the encounter with the officers were tense. Ethan and Lyra stayed on edge, constantly aware that their quiet life could be upended at any moment. The woman who had intervened remained a mystery, but her presence had given them a brief moment of hope. Yet, that hope was fragile. They knew that as long as they stayed on this planet, the threat of being separated hung over them. Ethan spent the next few days trying to make sense of what had happened. He couldn't shake the image of the officers and their cold, calculating faces, nor could he ignore the woman who had stepped in to protect them. Who was she? What had given her the power to stop the officers in their tracks? And most importantly, why had she chosen to help them? Lyra was quieter than usual, still grappling with the revelation of her pregnancy and the uncertainty it brought. She had retreated into herself more in the past week, spending long hours alone in the house, her mind lost in thought. Ethan hated to see her this way, but he knew that she needed time. They both did. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Lyra approached Ethan, who was sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. "We need to leave," she said, her voice soft but filled with urgency. Ethan turned to face her, surprised by the suddenness of her words. "What do you mean, leave where?" "Leave this place," she said, her eyes dark with worry. "We can't stay here any longer. They'll come for us again, and next time they might not back down." Ethan stood up, his mind racing. "You're right, I've been thinking the same thing, but where would we go? We don't exactly have anywhere to run." Lyra bit her lip, clearly struggling with the weight of the decision. "I don't know, but we can't stay here. If we wait too long, they'll come back and they won't leave us any choice." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. He had never been good at making decisions when there were so many unknowns, but Lyra was right. They couldn't stay where they were, not with the authorities watching them. "All right," he said, determination hardening in his voice. "We'll leave, but we need a plan. We can't just wander off into the unknown." Lyra nodded, her expression both relieved and anxious. "I've been thinking about that. I may know someone who can help us, someone who owes me a favor." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Who?" Lyra hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. "Her name is Kara. She's from my world. She's one of the few who left after the war. She runs a safe house, a place where people like us, fugitives, refugees, can find shelter. She might be able to help us." Ethan's heart pounded at the thought of finding someone who could provide them with a safe place. But at the same time, he felt a knot of uncertainty in his stomach. How could they trust someone they had never met? How could Lyra be so sure that this Kara would help them? "I know it sounds risky," Lyra continued, sensing his hesitation. "But we don't have many options. Kara has always helped those in need, and we need her help more than ever." Ethan took a deep breath, weighing the risks. He couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at him, but he also couldn't ignore the fact that they had to move, had to act. They couldn't wait around for the authorities to come again. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "We'll go to her, we'll take the risk." Lyra gave him a small, relieved smile. "Thank you, Ethan. I knew you'd understand." That night they packed what little they could carry, clothes, a few essentials, and anything that might help them survive on the road. There was no time to waste. They had to leave before it was too late. The next morning, just before dawn, they set out. The air was cool and crisp as they walked through the quiet streets, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Ethan kept his eyes on the road ahead, trying not to think about the dangers that lay ahead. He had never been a man who liked to run, but he knew this was the only choice they had. Lyra walked beside him, her steps silent but her body tense. She didn't speak much during their journey, but Ethan could feel the weight of her thoughts. He wanted to ask her what was going through her mind, but he knew that now wasn't the time for questions. They needed to focus. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but think about how much their lives had changed in such a short amount of time. He had come to this planet seeking a new beginning, a fresh start after his failed ventures. But now his world had shifted in ways he hadn't expected. He was no longer alone in his struggles. He had Lyra and their future child or children to think about. The road was long and difficult, but they made their way through the wilderness, keeping to the paths less traveled. They had to be careful. If anyone saw them, if the wrong people found them, they might not get another chance to escape. Several days into their journey, they arrived at a small, secluded village hidden deep in the hills. It wasn't much, just a cluster of homes surrounded by dense forest, but it was far from the prying eyes of the authorities. This was where Kara's safe house was located. Ethan and Lyra approached cautiously, looking for any signs of danger. But the village was quiet, almost eerily so. As they moved closer, a woman appeared from one of the huts. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, her face hard but somehow familiar. "Lyra," she said, her voice low but full of recognition. "It's been a long time." Lyra nodded, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "Kara, it's good to see you." The two women exchanged a brief, knowing look before Kara turned to Ethan. "And you must be the human," she said, her tone skeptical but not unkind. Ethan nodded, his nerves on edge. "Yes, I'm Ethan. We need your help." Kara studied him for a moment before nodding. "Come inside, we'll talk." They followed Kara into one of the huts, which was surprisingly well kept for its remote location. Inside, there was a small fire burning in the center, and a table covered with maps and supplies. It was clear that Kara had seen her fair share of refugees and travelers over the years. "So, what's the situation?" Kara asked, sitting down at the table and gesturing for them to do the same. Lyra glanced at Ethan before speaking. "We're being hunted. The authorities know about us, and they won't stop until they have us. I'm pregnant with Ethan's child, and they want to take me away. We need to leave this planet, but we don't have the resources or the means to get off-world. We need your help." Kara listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. When Lyra finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You're right. They won't stop, but you've come to the right place. I can get you out of here, but it won't be easy. We'll need to move quickly, and you'll have to trust me." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was also a glimmer of hope. This was their chance to escape. This was their shot at a new life. "We're willing to do whatever it takes," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll trust you, Kara." Kara nodded. "Good, I'll make the arrangements, but you'll have to stay here until we can move out. It'll take a few days." Ethan and Lyra stayed in the safe house, grateful for the respite, but the tension never fully left them. Every night, Ethan found it hard to sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of what might go wrong. But Lyra seemed to be calmer, perhaps because she knew they were one step closer to freedom. After what felt like an eternity, the day finally came. Kara had arranged everything. They were going to leave the planet and find a safe place far away from the authorities. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of hope. They were going to be okay, and with that hope, they set off once again, determined to build a new life together.